Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Arrogant. So in this video I'd like to go over a healer build for the Paladin. Now this build will be for module 20 and you should be able to get your party members through pretty much any content with this build, and yes, including the new dungeon, the Vault of Stars. However, with the current state of the Paladin healer, it is a good bit more challenging to actually get your party members through those hard heal checks, where all you really need to do is pure healing. Now we have the benefit of being able to give our allies a extra layer of protection through those divine barriers, those extra blue HP shields, and this gives us our uniqueness compared to the other healers, albeit the warlock can do a bit of shielding, but nowhere near as good as the paladin. But that aside, we're going to jump straight into things and we're going to go initially to powers. So what setup do I generally use? Well, looking over here, this is what I generally use for most content. Normally for our at-wills, you're just using the cure wounds for a backup heal every now and again at a decent magnitude. For your encounter powers, your main healing power would be Divine Shelter. It actually recently got a buff up on its heal magnitude, up there to 265 now. However, alternatively, they have also went and changed the Divine Touch, so now it won't affect companions anymore. So if people are running around with other fighter companions, this won't be divided up amongst them, but it won't heal them either, making it a lot more easier to, let's say you want to use this as a versatile heal power. You might want to heal 2 people, you might want to heal 1 person, and you would heal them for a lot more magnitude than, let's say, Divine Shelter. Divine Shelter is your power which you would just spam all the time to just keep everybody healed. Has pretty low divinity cost. You can cast like 8 of these before your divinity is all gone, and with Divine Touch you can cast up to 10 of these, so it is even better. But the problem is Divine Touch is a smaller area and you'll have to aim it so that there's only a few targets. The more targets you have within this area, the lower the effect it is. So it's a good versatile power for healing dungeons when you have 5 people. If you want to heal more than a few people, if you want to heal like all 5 party members, then definitely go with Divine Shelter instead, especially when you're in a boss fight where everybody's generally grouped up. You would generally use that instead. And then our backup powers, we have Sacred Weapon to give us divinity regen, along with Circle of Divinity. And Circle of Divinity, on top of giving divinity regen, will also help you to heal a bit more, giving you an extra 15% there while you stand within its area. But its area is pretty small, so it's generally only very good for boss fights. Now, when you're fighting lots of mobs, generally I like to switch out to Banishment instead of, let's say, Sacred Weapon, and then switch out Burning Light instead of your Circle of Divinity, just to stun enemies, and stunned enemies won't be able to deal damage to your allies, and therefore you won't have to heal as much. Then for our daily powers, normally I'm running with Sanctuary and Shield of Faith, albeit you can sometimes switch to Lay on Hands when you're in a dungeon, and let's say you want an emergency heal to heal somebody to full, like real quick. Let's say they're about to die. It's really nice. It's basically like a health stone that you carry around you can put on somebody. So generally you might want to use this instead. And Shield of Faith is a good bit better for when you are running in dungeons and you're continually moving. Sanctuary is good for when you're in a boss fight and you just want to heal people for a significant amount. My heal magnitude is 600 there, and it will last for 12 seconds. But the problem is you'll have to channel this and you won't be able to do anything while you're channeling it. Then our class features, you generally just want to all the time run Composure along with Aura of Restoration, and that's pretty much it. You can do some combo with Aura of Life and your Cleansing Touch within PvP, but I might make another video separately on that entirely for PvP. And then your feat setup is generally just this. However, with this 5th set of feats, you might want to switch. Instead of Coalescence, you might want to use Divine Intervention. I like Coalescence when you need to do that pure healing. You can cast your Shield of Faith, and then whatever heal powers you cast during that period of your Shield of Faith being up on your targets, you can then just purely heal them. This is good for, let's say, the last boss in the Vault of Stars, where you need to output a ton of just pure heals. Because the problem is when you spam, let's say, Divine Shelter, and then your allies aren't taking lots of damage and the shields aren't going away quick enough, then you're just wasting the heals by creating more shields basically on top of shields. So that's pretty much it, and I think that's enough said. Just make sure you have this set up and you should be good to go. So we shall move on then to the statistics and what ideally you want to be using as a Paladin healer. Well, initially the main stats for contributing to our heals is this damage here. It will contribute directly to our base healing. We get an extra 10% there, and this is just related exactly to our item level divided by 10, and then we get that extra 10%. So the more high item level you have, the more healing you will do. But along with that, to modify it, our power will also affect the potency of our heals, along with our outgoing healing and the incoming healing of our target. And then, depending whether you critically heal or not, your critical strike and your critical severity will depend on how much you actually heal for on a crit. So you want to get all these statistics up nice and high. And if I go in combat here with this dummy, you can see I will proc up my potency and I'll get there nearly capped out on my power. And these are pretty good stats. And all things considered, you can see I'm not actually using any hunt gear from, well, except this pants, but sure, whatever. You could use something else. And you can see my stats are looking really good here. I have my nearly 90% power, nearly 90% critical strike, nearly 90% critical severity, and my outgoing healing there is just over 60%, which is decent and will get you through pretty much any content. So that's it for stats. You ideally want to get these ratings capped out there at 50%. As you can see, them being on green, they give the max. And your cap there at 50% will equal your total item level. And it's simple as that. We just have 3 stats to focus on with ratings. And then the percentages are based off our companions and other things I will go into later. So we move on to our actual gear. Now, as a Paladin healer, as I mentioned already, you want to get as high item level as possible. So that's your main focus. Get gear with nice high item level. As you can see there, I'm having 1250. However, with the new module coming out today, new Sharandar, you'll be able to get like Forest Guardian gear, which has 1500 item level. And you'll be also able to get gear with the Seals of the Wilds, having 1300 item level there. So you might want to go and pick that up instead. But as secondary statistics, you ideally want to focus on, yes, getting these ratings of power, crit strike, and critical severity. So ideally get like gear pieces which have those bonuses. You can see my headpiece has a secondary statistic of critical strike. My armor there has critical severity. My arms again have critical strike, and my boots again have critical strike. And you get the point. So as for the rest of the gear, ideally you would want to have these arms of the Lion Guard or the Blessed ones, anyway, that stack up these power, and this will help you cap out this power rating. But you can do it through many other methods. There are lots of different gear pieces you could run as a healer. You may want to consider looking at gear such as the Garistro Horns. Whenever you heal somebody for over 10% of your maximum hit points, you'll effectively gain those critical strike stats, making it so that you can crit more often. However, it's capped at 90%, and with my current build, I have 88.5% critical strike already. So I find it's kind of pointless, and those stacks are kind of hard to get as a Paladin healer. Then for your armor, you could, of course, use the Bone Devil's Ribcage again to give you those critical strike stacks along with critical severity. It's a pretty nice buff there if you get multiple of those stacks and you can keep them up. But again, as a Paladin healer, it can be considerably hard, especially with having so many hit points. We gain a buff of 10% extra hit points, and along with the way it's linked to our item level now, we can have quite a lot of hit points. So, and then as for our feet, you might want to run with the Boots of the Herald, buffing up allies' defense and your own, and that way you'll all be a bit more survivable and take less damage. Now, what I recommend for our weapons is definitely these Lionheart, especially when you're running, let's say, random queues and such. But alternative to the Lionheart, you might want to run the Celestial weapon set, especially if you're running a long fight, because you just need to cast 5 encounters and you'll gain that 7.5% outgoing healing. And it has a teeny bit more higher item level through those weapons as well, and therefore you would gain a little bit more outgoing healing through that base damage. And of course you could also use these masterwork weapons that would give a buff to all your other party members of damage, healing, and also damage resistance. And ideally you would be in a party where good few people would have this as well. But I generally like to just stick with these Lionheart weapons. So now we move to our neck and waist set along with the artifact, and I highly recommend running the Tiamat set. It will give you 5% outgoing healing and 5% incoming healing, and this is a really good buff. Now the hit you take to the item level is in fact actually not as bad as you would think, and therefore this 5% outgoing healing definitely makes up for that item level loss and a bit more, and there's no other real set there that's going to give you that extra outgoing healing. Of course you might want to look at the new set with new Sharandar that will now give you the healing like the Demon Lord set, this Trickster's Gift set, where you basically gain up to 10% additional damage or outgoing healing depending on the difference of hit points between you and your target. And now as a healer this can be questionable as it's whether it's good to run or not. However, you would only need like a 2 or 3% extra bonus of outgoing healing on this to make it better than the Tiamat set because of the item level difference. So it could be worth to run it, and I think I will. When I get this set I will run it, I will test it out and see what's the difference. But all things considered, it's not going to be a huge difference. Tiamat set is 100% uptime of 5% outgoing healing, and this set will be variable depending on the difference of your hit points and your target's hit points. So it can be not that great. That aside, we move to these rings, and these are the ideal rings you want to be running as they have the highest item level and they also buff up the ratings of critical strike and critical severity. The ring of the Herald and also this ring of the Brutal Fiend. It will give you that extra power, which is kind of pointless at this stage because we have our power capped and you ideally want that as well. But if you don't, that will help you out, but it will only be every 30 seconds for 10 seconds. Shirt and pants again, just high item level as possible. So now we move to our artifacts, and you can see I'm actually using 2 storyteller journals, and the main reason for this is just to give me the actual bonus of increasing my ability scores by 1. Increasing my ability scores by 1 will give me a bit more outgoing healing through wisdom, will give me a bit more critical severity through dexterity, along with more recharge speed and forte through charisma. Now as a paladin healer we have forte, which will benefit us with extra divinity regen along with critical severity. So that's pretty nice right there. And then with my other artifact, of course, I'm running the Tiamat's Orb to complete that set. And as my primary, I'm using whatever. You want to be running something that would probably buff up your party's damage, like this Sparkling Fate emblem. It's got a 15-second uptime, but it will only do 4 or 5% extra damage, but it will also buff up your allies' defensive things. So I think that's a pretty neat one to run. Of course, you could run other things like the Sigil of the Paladin. There's so many other artifacts that are pretty good that you could run. So now we're going to move to our enchantments. Now, for our armor enchantment, you ideally want to be running, yes, a bark shield. Generally, we don't get hit too often, and when we do get hit, we may as well have these bark shield stacks up to reduce that damage. However, if you're running some fight where you do take a lot of hits, you might want to consider running something like the Negation or the Shadowclad. But that aside, all round for a healer, bark shield is pretty good. Then for our weapon enchantment, I like to run with a Vorpal. It will just increase my critical strike and critical severity stats by 4%, making my bigger heals bigger. Of course, you could also look at using the Holy Avenger, as this will heal your targets for a little bit more. However, it's not really that great, but it should help out if, let's say, you're running some content where people take a lot of damage over time. Let's say in the Vault of Stars in the last boss. So then we move to overall enchantments. Now, in utilities, you want those dark enchantments to give you the forte. In your defensive ones, you either want to be running something like radiant enchantments to buff up your hit points, but if you're running like the Ribcage or the Gristro Horns, you might want to reduce your hit points and increase some defensive stats. So yeah, just stack up defense and awareness, and you should be grand just there. Then in offense, you want to be juggling. You want to be juggling between dark enchantments and like azure enchantments to get that critical strike along with that critical severity. You might also want a few radiants to increase this power, but generally you don't really need to. So now let's move on to our modifications. First up, in our weapon modification, you want enhanced cure wounds, of course. Then in our shield, you want this forte of alternatively, you could get this critical severity rating if you needed, but you should be able to get it somewhere else. And you could also use like recharge speed or AP gain. I just like the forte. And then for the stat gain here, you may as well take one which you need, either critical strike or your power. We can't get critical severity here, so that's a bit annoying. And then for our jewels and our armor kits. For our armor kits here, you can see I'm using critical severity here. You could use critical strike, or you could use hit points, or you could even use power. Just use one that has the nice high item level of 44 extra, and that will give you a nice boost having 4 of those armor kits. And then for our jewels, it really doesn't matter. I just have awareness on all of them here. You could have stamina regen alternatively. There's nothing there that's going to buff your outgoing healing other than the item level that they give you. So now we move to our race and ability scores. Now the ideal race is the Aasimar. It will give you a 1% boost to your outgoing healing, along with having some other buffs like increasing your hit points and your allies' hit points. Now alternatively, you can of course just use like a human, like I am. It will give you a 1% bonus to all your offense stats and your defense stats, and that's really good, along with giving a +3 bonus to any ability score, which I put the +3 into wisdom to give me more outgoing healing. And yes, those are the ability scores you want to be using. Now you could arguably take charisma instead of dexterity. Dexterity will give you critical severity, but so will charisma through forte. But charisma will also give you recharge speed. It depends. If you're running trials and stuff, you might want charisma instead. So now we move on to our companions, and this is what I have here. As a summoned companion, there are a good few I recommend. You might want to run with this dedicated squire, which will heal your allies with his cleansing touch, healing them up to 15% of their max health over 6 seconds, which adds up to a pretty nice heal, and it's AoE, so you'll heal lots of people. The other ones I recommend are these companions here. You might want to run the Helmite Paladin Ghost. It's pretty good for boss fights, where whenever they hit the target when the seal is up, they will also heal on their hits of that 3%. Then you have other ones like the Dread Warrior, who will have his Siphon Strike, where he'll buff up allies' power and also heal them. Then you have an augment companion like the Polar Bear Cub, which will increase your critical strike and your power. Then you have ones like the Scorpion, which will give the benefit of having 100% uptime of combat advantage. This is really good for boss fights like Tiamat, where you normally can't get combat advantage. Then you have ones like the Spine Devil, which will increase the vulnerability of the target, meaning your allies will deal more damage. And then you have ones like the Stalwart Lion, who will give you that buff with radiant weapon stacks to use allies and also intercept 10% of the damage take of allies who are next to him. And then you have also like the Succubus, who will also have the same vulnerability with her kiss for a short duration. She's good for AoE because she can hit multiple targets in a cone. So we can easily not run with an augment, as we only have 3 ratings to cap out, so it can be very easy to do so, and just run with a active combat companion should be just grand. Now for our actual equipment, I'm running with ones that give me either critical severity or my critical strike to help cap the ratings, and you can see the rune stones I'm running there are mainly just arcane and profane, again giving that critical severity and critical strike. Then for our powers here, I'm running potency, and it helps me get this more power. Gives me this power and puts it up there nice and high, but I have to attack a target to do so. You can see when that potency procs up, I'm up there at 88.5%, and when I use my Forger's box, that goes a bit higher. And yes, my Forger's box is only on green. If you have it any higher rarity, you'll cap this power out, and if you get one of these lucky stats, then even better. So yeah, that was the potency. And then for the rest here, you want companions that give you a bonus to these stats: your power, your critical strike, critical severity, or your outgoing healing. Now you want to be ideally having like the baby deep crow, gives you 7.5% power, and then the compy's instincts giving another 7.5% power. Now of course you can run alternatives. You can run ones which give you, let's say, 3.8% crit and then 3.8% like outgoing healing, or something that gives you 3.8% crit and 3.8% power. Now you can just juggle around with those, but the ones I have here are what build me up to the stats that I have. So that's what it works for me. Ideally I would have something else that would help me cap out these stats. Let's say if I had the rib cage, I could dump this black dragon iron stone and get something else that would give me more outgoing healing, for instance, or even power. So you see what I mean. So the baby deep crow gives me the power, the black dragon ironstone gives me the crit, the baby polar bear gives me the outgoing healing, the quickling gives crit and outgoing healing, and the clumpy gives power. So now we go and we move on to our mounts. Now in our current section here, you can see I'm just running with the Oriel armament from the Swift Golden Lion. It'll basically give you a shield up to 30% of your max HP, which funnily enough is actually more shield than my Divine Shelter will give to my targets, and it'll give a shield to everybody who's near enough to where the lion does his roar. And then I'm running with Providence, and Providence basically has a chance when you or your nearby party members get hit, they will get healed for 6% of their max HP, which is good, but then it gives you stacks of Radiant Weapon, which we really don't need because we're not here really to do damage, but it literally just heals. Of course you could use something else that would give you critical severity or critical strike, or even both. Like your Ferocious Predator would give you power and critical severity, and there's just ones there you can use. Just try and cap out those ratings. Then for our stable section here, now our insignias, you ideally want to have dominance insignias. Dominance insignias will give you that power and that forte. Forte will give you more increased divinity regen along with our critical severity. Then alternatively on the other ones, you can see I'm running brutalities here to give me power and critical severity. You could run other ones that would give you like skill, I believe, would give you critical strike and critical severity as well. Now for our actual insignia bonuses, I'm just running a bunch of Gladiator's Guile, give me that movement speed, and I'm also running 2 Assassin's Covenant to give me that extra offensive statistics by decreasing my defense statistics. Now as regards to defense statistics on a Paladin healer, we really don't need a whole lot. We have a shield which gives us a whole lot more HP when we block with it, along with just having that 10% extra boost to hit points makes us really survivable. Along with being a healer, we can generally keep our own self healed, right? Anyway, with that being said, then with your collars, doesn't matter with your practical, doesn't matter with your sturdy, and for your supportive you ideally want that outgoing healing, doesn't matter for your unified, and for your wayfaring you ideally want to have like the critical severity to increase those critical heals. So now we move on to our boons. Now here in our campaign boons, you ideally again want to have all these power percentages, and then of course our critical strike and our critical severity as usual. Then you can stack up some defense ones, it doesn't really matter here. Make sure to pick up that movement speed, and at tier 5 make sure to pick up the forte and the outgoing healing. And then for the master boons here, you can either take Blessed Resilience, will buff up the survivability of your allies and also heal their stamina basically, and then you also have Blessed Advantage there, which will heal them over time and also give them more power and recharge, which is nice. And then for your guild, in offense again, you ideally want to have critical strike, power, or your critical severity. And defense doesn't really matter. Utility, you ideally want revive sickness if you're running content where you know you might die. So that's pretty much it. Last thing to mention would be my buffs. What am I using to get all these stats nice and high? Well, these are my main buff food. I'm running the Wildstorm Elixir, critical severity, running the Superior Flask Potency, more critical severity, Watermelon Sorbet to give me that power, and Prime Rib to give me that power and hit points. Now instead of Watermelon Sorbet, you could run Seed Bread, or you could run the Mushi with the current Feast of Lanterns event. And then for a belt item, you ideally want to have this Forger's Box, and of course you'd ideally have it on Mythic, but it will give you that extra power percentage along with one of the random other statistics there. And yes, that's pretty much it. I believe I still need to mention overloads, as they are one type of consumable. You ideally want to have a greater white dragon glyph. Now you could stack 2 of these, but they will basically give you that extra outgoing healing, but it won't be actual outgoing healing. It will just heal additionally on top of your heal when you have this up, and it will also give you a bit of power, and it's pretty nice. And then other one here, I have Devil's Precision to give me that extra 5% critical chance to get that stat nice and a good bit higher. Now of course, if you need the survivability, make sure to run with something like the Bulwark of Brimstone as well. So I believe that is everything for my build. If I've left anything out or missed anything, be sure to ask me in the comments below and I'll get back to you when I can. So hopefully this was at least somewhat helpful, and if I presented this well, consider giving the video a like, and if you're new around here, consider subscribing. I will see you guys around. Goodbye for now.